In our battalion, we had a commander that didn't know how to call in airstrikes.
Did not know?
He did not know how to call in airstrikes, and he was too proud and too pompous to let his forward observer do it. And he called in airstrikes, and a third of his company was either wounded or killed. In order to cover up that fuck-up that he did, they gave him a Congressional Medal of Honor, which really just completely pissed me off, and I had friends to die in that, friends to be wounded in that. And some of them are right here in Philadelphia, crazy as bedbugs. The treatment that some of the people did to the actual people that we were fighting, I couldn't go along with. I saw people interrogated, and because they wouldn't answer, they were thrown out of helicopters.
Did you see that?
I've seen that. These prisoners that were captured one time, they've got a substance called detonating cord, det cord. Okay, and I've seen them wrap the det cord around 3 guys, and because they wouldn't answer the questions, they ignited it and blew their heads off. We had a battalion commander named Colonel, I believe he's General now. I believe he's a sissy. But anyway, he issued all of us hatchets and offered a case of whiskey for the first person to chop someone's head off. Okay, and this happened. Someone actually did get their head chopped off, and this happened in Bencat. And this was the latter part of 1965. And the dude that did it, his name was from 2nd Platoon, B Company 2nd Platoon. And he went in there and he's so hyped up and actually chopped off a Vietnamese's head. You would see some of the guys walking around with ears, you know, as a symbol of the kills that they had did. And this isn't, we're supposed to be the American fighting people. We don't do this kind of thing.
Vietnam was a teenagers' war. The average age of an American soldier was 19. They were bred mostly on a lethal innocence, which needs simple Hollywood heroes and simple Hollywood bad guys. A faith that says their nation is more virtuous than any other nation. I remember the mother of one veteran saying that she thought her son had gone to fight somewhere near Cuba, where there were communists real close and threatening. When her son finally came home in a box, she hung the flag upside down, and people said she was a crank. And when the surviving veterans came home and began to tell the secrets of Vietnam, that it was really a war of rampant technology against people, that collateral damage was a military term for the slaughter of civilians, people didn't want to listen because it broke the faith. And for this, the veterans have paid a price. 60% of all combat soldiers are alcoholics. 40% are drug addicts. 60% of all black veterans can't find a job. Thousands are in prison, and their divorce rate and their suicide rate is the highest in America. The report which gives these facts was suppressed by the government because what it says breaks the faith.
The politicians never said the war was right or wrong. The politicians never had the guts to come out and either declare war or get the hell out. They were hoping that the war would go away in time, and they're treating the veterans, the social war of the Vietnam veterans. That stigma of the war has now eroded onto the veterans. The responsibility of explaining the war has fallen onto the veterans' shoulders. Those politicians are now retired with big paychecks. Now who's asking them anything? What guilt's on their shoulder? What responsibility? The problem of the war, the stigma of the war, now falls to the veterans. America's uncomfortable with the Vietnam War, but you got to heal from that war, just like a wound. You got to scrub it, you got to debride it, you got to examine it, and you'll cleanse from it. What they've done with the Vietnam War, and because of that, it's fallen on the Vietnam veteran, is taking the wound and putting it in the closet. What's happened is it's festered. It's festered, and it's hurt the Vietnam veteran. Do you realize we've had 55,000 suicides, as many people as we lost in Vietnam? That's an atrocity.
55,000 suicides
55,000 of Vietnam are veterans, yes. Now, my God, how many people have to commit suicide, kill themselves? You know, it's myself, my own brother, he spent 1 year in combat. 3 years with a chemical warfare unit in Vietnam, 4 years total. I was the casualty of the war directly. I came home in a stretcher. I got shot in the back, both legs, stabbed in the left arm. I was paralyzed in my right hand with a piece of shrapnel. I was wounded in the neck, the head. 40% of my body was burnt with napalm. I was hurt. I was crushed. Could I explain the war when I come home? No. I remember the New York Times calling me, talking to me, and they said, Captain Christian, what was my philosophy on the war? I'd only graduated from high school, so I didn't know what my philosophy was supposed to be. I told him that I feel as though we should either fight a war to win or get the hell out.
Yeah.
With that, I was restricted to my ward, just restricted to my room as a hospital patient. And here they'd bring me out one day to give me a medal, and the next day they'd keep me under restrictions. It was sad. So that was how a captain faced the war. How do you think many of the enlisted guys faced it? You look at it. You look at the thing, you think, geez, was there a method for them coming back one at a time? Not like in World War I, where everyone came back in mass and they formed their veterans organizations. Was there any real madness to the politicians in bringing them back and letting them infiltrate back into society, one day in a war, one day back here?
How simple it all seemed when General Pershing's doughboys marched home from Europe in 1919. The military parade at the end of war has always been a grand illusion, especially in countries themselves not ravaged by war. Like television movies in which blood and gore are never seen, the parades of the past were great demonstrations of vital, victorious manhood. Vietnam changed all that, perhaps forever, and the longing of some Vietnam veterans for parades and flags can never be realized because they brought home the truth of war. Imagine a parade for them, led by human crabs without limbs, men without faces, men with minds and testicles blown away, frail young men addicted and dying from cancers caused by chemical warfare, and behind them, in endless formation, Vietnamese women and children and old men zapped by the friendly fire of napalm. And who would take the salute for such a parade? The generals? The politicians? The arms manufacturers? Not likely. Last year, the 52 American hostages were welcomed home from Iran in one of the greatest parades of all. It was nicely made for television, in which commercials for Pepsi and Japanese cars were certainly not out of place, because broken bodies and impermissible pain were not on display. Of course, they were officially approved heroes, who would embarrass no one with confessions of guilt or failure. Victory in their case, having been bought conveniently with money.
Well, what does the city, as big as this, now provide for the veterans?
The city directly, actually nothing. The mayor appointed one person
What's he do?
to be the commissioner of Veterans Affairs, but he doesn't have an office, he doesn't have staff, and there's nothing he can do.
I never met Bob Mueller in Vietnam, but I vividly remember him being thrown out of the Republican Party convention in Miami Beach 9 years ago in his wheelchair. Bob, a Marine officer, was shot through the spine and is a decorated hero in the John Wayne tradition. But alas, there he was, spoiling it all by shouting at President Nixon that the war in Vietnam could never be won. Bob Mueller now runs Vietnam Veterans of America from a seedy office in New York and with barely enough money to pay the rent, in contrast to the government Veterans Administration, whose enormous budget goes mostly to those who went to war and came back winners.
Bob, some veterans have told me that people have blamed them for losing the war.
That really hurts. Let me give a sense of perspective on this, because it's very important. You know, the whole fervor with which my generation was willing to go fight is totally misunderstood. With the Vietnam era, more than 80% of the guys that wound up in the military enlisted, okay? More than 80% enlisted. In the Second World War, 2/3 of all of those were drafted.
So the truth about soldiers who went to Vietnam was very different from what people understood. They understood it to be a drafted war. In fact, you're saying that 2/3 of those who went volunteered to go.